Since terror is dominating the political debate, let's talk terror for a few minutes. First of all, I'm so grateful to President Obama. As I said, I had some criticisms of the State of the Union speech, but it was wonderful when he stood up for Muslim Americans and Muslims around the world. And it was also great that he pointed out the very common sense reality that terror does not represent a threat to the future existence of the United States. The Republicans love to say we're at war with an entity that could destroy us, and that is absolute nonsense. That said, the other problem we have in our conversation about terror is that we always assume that terror is something that comes from the stranger and not from ourselves. So, case in point, we found out this week that the gunman who opened fire in Lafayette, Louisiana, in a movie theater this summer, killing 2 and injuring at least 7 others before killing himself, was inspired in part by Dylann Roof. Dylann Roof, you may remember, was the killer of the churchgoers in South Carolina. Now, they found out that they've released the journal, what was described by one reporter as the hate-filled handwritten journal of this Louisiana theater shooter. And while it doesn't directly talk about his motives, the killer was named John Russell Hauser, it shows that he openly praised Dylann Roof. He said, "Thank you for the wake-up call, Dylann," adding that Roof was green but good. So, in other words, his only regret about Dylann Roof was that he didn't kill even more people. So there's a thread here. There's a commonality. There's a community of hate, and there are many others who feel the same way that this gentleman does. In fact, Dylann Roof himself was radicalized on the internet, as we're always talking about Islamist terrorists being radicalized on the internet. That's precisely what happened to Dylann Roof before his horrid terror-inspired murder of African-American churchgoers. So why don't we say this? And the other question that keeps coming up is, why wasn't Dylann Roof one of the dozens of people who were charged with terrorism in 2015? Why, when the terrorism statistics for the domestic United States, when those statistics were released for 2015, was Dylann Roof not listed? Why were his victims not listed as victims of terrorism? Why do we define terrorism as only coming from one group and not from another? Bear in mind, our definition of terrorism as used by the government, there's no justification for it, really. If you want to say terrorism is something that's organized by parties outside the United States, for example, that would be one thing. But we describe people as terrorists in the official statistics when they've been radicalized on the internet, if they are Muslim. We do not describe people as terrorists if they were radicalized on the internet, but they are fighting for white supremacy or the far right. There is no justification for that except an implicit, perhaps, to be fair, subconscious bigotry. But either way, however you look at it, it's wrong. What's more, in the case of Dylann Roof, he was inspired by a specific hate group before he went on his killing spree in Charleston, South Carolina. Roof wrote the following. The first website I came to, this is when he went online to be radicalized, was the Council of Conservative Citizens. There were pages on pages of these brutal black on white murders. When Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, who have both talked about censoring the internet to prevent the rise of terrorism through online inspiration, when they have those conversations, or when other people have those conversations, nobody mentions domestic terrorism of the white supremacist variety. If you're going to censor Al-Qaeda, why wouldn't you censor the Council of Conservative Citizens? Now, as I said in a previous program, I don't think censorship or suppression is the solution. But if you think it is, why are you treating one group differently from another? There may be subtle yet real biases at place here. Meanwhile, when we talk about ISIS, let us not forget that ISIS is still alive and well and doing its horrid and evil work around the world. In fact, it struck twice during the past week, once in Istanbul at the so-called Blue Mosque, which is iconic in the Muslim world, and once in Jakarta, Indonesia. And in addition, there was a bombing on the Pakistani consulate in Jalalabad, Afghanistan. Now, what is striking about all three of these ISIS attacks is that in all three cases, the victims of the attack were Muslim. Therefore, perhaps the problem is not something inherent in Islam. And yes, I'm talking to you, Bomar. Perhaps the problem is not something inherent in Islam. Perhaps there are other forces at work. Think about it, please.